something like 1984 could actually happen. This is the direction the world is going in at the present time. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever.
Let him who hath understanding calculate the number of the beast. For the number is that of a man, and the number is 666.
Sheep among wolves.
Okay, I want to go ahead and pivot into this whole economic system that they want to put us into. But before we do that, we kind of got to go back and kind of frame what our current economic system is, which is based on the Federal Reserve. And that all started in 1913. And we can talk about that a little bit if you want to. Jekyll Island.
Yes, actually, the Federal Reserve System came into existence when Congress was on recess, and the same time, the IRS came into existence. And of course, the IRS,
the progressive tax system.
Exactly, it's progressive. It was from the start, and it's continuing.
And of course, it was only supposed to, incorporate the top 1%. By 1917, it incorporated 95% of the country, and it was like 90% tax rate.
Yeah, they
top tier.
Pretty quick. And again, it's progressive. And what we mean by that is that the person at the lowest economic strata pays the least tax percentage-wise, and the person at the top of the strata pays the most percentage-wise, theoretically.
In theory, of course. There's loopholes. That's why the tax code's 100,000 pages.
Exactly.
Lots of loopholes.
But that tax was meant to pay for government, primarily to start out was for government safety and defense. That's what the money was normally paid for to begin with. And as we know, that kind of ballooned out of control.
Well, they created all these agencies.
Yeah. And those agencies needed money. And the Federal Reserve System was created as a private corporation.
In conjunction with the tax system.
With the IRS.
The two go hand in hand.
Yes, they do. And what we don't understand, for the most part, the majority of people, is that the Federal Reserve System in 1913 was formed as a private company owned by certain individuals. Some of those individuals,
top bankers,
Rockefellers, yeah,
J.P. Morgan, Chase, Rockefeller,
Rothschild.
Right.
Rothschild was in Europe. Rothschild controlled.
Yeah, they were the European banks.
Yeah. And so they came in. So the money that was the system that was created was what we like to call funny money, because there was nothing. Originally, they put gold as a backing. We have to take their word that it was one for one.
But they just manipulated the gold, pricing. I mean, Roosevelt did that in the 30s.
Yeah, and this went along until the early 70s.
And what you're talking about when you talk about funny money is fiat. I mean, that's the economic term.
Yeah, in other words, a private corporation lent our government money, so they print $1 billion and lend it to the government. So in other words, you look at a dollar that's only backed by the Federal Reserve, and then charge interest on that funny money.
As
So
opposed to having a national bank, which is what we had prior to
we
that.
had that prior.
And how they sold it in 1913 was this, because what happens in a natural capitalism system is you have these periods of rising and then crashing and then rising and crashing, and every 10 or 20 years. And that's just natural in a capitalist system. It's just the way it operates. And how they sold it to, I guess, the common, people was that, oh, well, if we have a Federal Reserve, then we won't ever have these crashes again. Well, of course, that was a total lie, because we crashed in 1929, then we crashed in 84, we crashed in 2008. I mean, we still have crashes, but that's how they sold it to the common person was, oh, well, if we allow these banks to get in there, these private banks, then they'll regulate it so that, because they know what they're doing. And so we'll never have these, crashes anymore. And in reality, all it was a lot, I mean, these bankers were really going bankrupt every time it crashed. And it allowed them to, create a system where they'll never have to go bankrupt again, because the government will bail them out, and they'll always make money through interest, through fiat. But you're right. It originally started out that it was tied to the gold.
And the Federal Reserve had only a control of a small amount of the total deposits in the country. Because back then you had savings and loans, you had all kinds of different individual banks, because individual banks had grown up as we moved west. And so you had all of these small banks dealing personally with individuals. And if they were having a problem, remember now that that time frame, we were still under an agricultural society primarily. And so if your crops didn't quite come in, the local bank, local savings and loan covered that. Well, the banks began to consolidate, and then they consolidated the savings and loans, and then I'm trying to remember when that was, in the 60s, early 70s. They basically drove the savings and loans out of business.
Well, that was the 1980s when it
So the
completely
80s,
went out.
yeah.
But you had in the 30s, I mean, you go back even to the 30s, you had the runs on the bank. And, and then that's where they created the FDIC. But the whole idea was that you had to have those charters were pre 1900, a lot of those banks. And so then they had to create these new charters under this whole federal system, under the Federal Reserve. And that's where most of these banks now are under this Federal Reserve charter system.
Correct.
But what you had, even before the savings and loans crash, and to get rid of the savings and loan, this whole idea that we can only borrow so much debt because we only had so much gold. And even in the 1930s, you had FDR that was manipulating the gold price. Literally, once or twice a day, they would meet in his office, and he would just pick it out of what's the number we need today? $32 an ounce, $28 an ounce. And they would just do that. And then, even during the 1930s, they confiscated the gold, so that they could manipulate this whole system. Well, you can only borrow so much money if you only have so much gold. And so they had to come up with a new system. And that's the system they came up with in the 1970s. And under Nixon, they moved away from this gold standard and moved into the standard we operate today, which allowed, the government to borrow like drunken sailors.
Yeah, and it created an inflationary period.
Right.
I remember when I graduated from University of Michigan, my bachelor's degree was 1963. That goes back a ways. And I interviewed for Chrysler, and I went up and they had a big room for, it was about 100 desks all in one room. And they said, "This is where we want you to be. We're glad to take you. We'll offer you a position in accounting, and we'll pay you $500 a month." That was the going rate for a college graduate at
And
that
back
time.
then, there wasn't a lot of college graduates.
No, there were not.
I mean, it
And
was a lot for you to, so you made good money
yeah,
coming out of
and
college.
people that worked in the with their hands, bricklayers, some of the other skilled trades were making somewhat comparable. So that was not an unusual wage, but it's, I mean, it, like you said, there weren't that many, and the wages weren't that high. Well, welcome to the 70s and 80s and 90s. And I bought my first house. It was $6,000. Oh, well,
Well, and that's the whole idea about this whole gold. It's not, people, your whole idea of why you buy gold as far as an investment is not because you're buying it to go up in value. You're going to because it is a core. I mean, when you go back in the earlier days, it used to always be tied to like a really nice suit. And so you would have an ounce of gold could buy you a really nice suit. And as we saw the price of gold go up, I mean, the prices of suits go up. I mean, it's at $1,500, $2,000 an ounce now. And the reality is a really nice suit will cost you, $1,500, $2,000. Um, so really, the value of stuff hasn't gone up. It's just changed.
hmm
And gold is that, that key where it, the that's where society is on that. And where you were saying you could buy a house for $6,000. That same house today is $200,000.
no. And therein lies some of the problem, because we're talking from 1913, and now we're at 2021 just about. And this system that was created, this progressive system of taxes, and economically, the Federal Reserve System is at its end of its life cycle, because you can only do this so long, and then it's going to crash. And the question now
And
becomes,
we've kind of seen birth pangs of that.
yeah,
We saw that in the housing market crash of the 2008, where literally, I mean, it's cheaper for you just to walk away from the house
yeah,
instead of, it's like, I'm just going to walk away. I'll never get my money back. That was a birth pang, as they say.
well, how does that affect the world economy? Because we've talked about the world economy, because really, uh, we have kind of discussed the reset. And what is the reset? The reset is simply um, one world system, one world economy, one world government, one world religion, rebranded. I think that was your term. Was that the
Yeah, it's
Great
the New
Reset? Is,
World Order rebranded.
yeah,
Now it's
and
called the Great Reset. It's the same exact thing that, we've been talking about for 50 years. It's this new world order. It's just now they call it the Great Reset. It's a great new name and it sounds awesome. Hey, we get to reset everything. It's awesome. No, it's still the same old new world order that
right,
George Bush talked about in the 1990s.
yeah. And what we are seeing is a speeding up of a consolidation of the economic system. If we look at the United States, we just talked about the savings and loan. That moved the banks so that the banks had better control over the money federally, not individually, not per city. Um, they
Even
began to
regionally.
come
It,
together,
it became a national.
became national, and then we saw it in the 2008, 10, the mortgage companies that there was independent mortgage companies that didn't went to different banks and got the best rate. And so that was consolidated and
Mortgage bankers is what they
mortgage
call them.
bankers. And now you have from the banks and financial institutions, the big ones, used to, before the mortgage industry collapsed in 2008, 10, they had about 10% of all deposits in this country. Once we went through all that, now they're sitting at 80 to 90% of all the deposits in this country, consolidated into 4 or 5 banks and financial institutions.
Well, even beyond that, you have
But-
FHA. FHA only had like 20,
Yeah,
15,
that
20% of the
was-
market share, and now they're, I think, up over 50% at
Yeah.
some
So
point.
basically,
So this government, and then it's Fannie and Freddie.
Fannie, Freddie, and FHA.
And by the way, Fannie and Freddie used to be public companies. I mean, they still are technically, but
it's pretty
really?
well owned by the government.
quasi-government.
Yeah. And so what you had is a consolidation again. And now we come here to COVID-19. And what we have here is that all of the small businesses across the country now are being eliminated because we have, you could you could go to Walmart, you could go to we have Publix here, but you can't go to a small grocer. You can't go to a small dress shop. They close them down in a lot of states. And the restaurants. I don't
Well,
know
I have here. I mean,
yeah.
I did it today shopping. I mean, here, up north here, it's there is no limit to walk into Meijer or Walmart. I mean, walk in there, there's hundreds of people. I go out, to the local the mall, and I have to stand outside waiting to get inside because they're only allowed, 10 people in the store at any given
Right.
time. I mean, it just doesn't even make sense. I can go to Meijer and it's like literally hundreds of people walking down. They don't care.
But
And
again,
there's no rhyme or reason why they're doing this.
we're seeing a nationalization in our country, a consolidation of every facet of our economic system is beginning to be controlled by less and less people. We have, I think I mentioned it last time, I might not have. We have a large institution that's a financial, um, large institutional financial company,
It's an
investment firm.
investment company.
Yeah, they control $7.5 trillion of people's 401s, annuities, other investments, and they invest in thousands of businesses, literally thousands, several thousand, over 3,000, and they invest 20, 30, 50% sometimes in monies that these individual businesses need to have, even though they're national companies. Apple, Walmart.
It's capital.
Yeah.
They're pouring capital into these
Pouring
companies
the capital
for
in.
stock.
And they are telling them what they can spend their money on. So the problem we have is that we are moving to a system now where they're not talking about short-term profit. They talk about the stakeholder. Well, that's not shareholder. That's not you and I. These are people that control that money. And when they take that money and tell the management that's running Walmart, you have to do climate control. You have to have well, they call it climate change now. You have to
The new
abide by
Green
what
Deal.
we want. You have to abide by our diversity laws. You have to go by where we want things delivered, who we want it to deliver. I mean, you go down the list.
Well, they're even to the point now where they could mandate these vaccines for the employees.
And that's another thing. The employer has to give the employees the vaccine because the money capital that they receive from the institutional investment company says you have to, or we won't give you the money. And so what's happening is that, again, this is getting consolidated. And as it's consolidated, you're seeing a growth of globalism. That's the fancy word out there now. But that simply means a one world system that's made up of the government and economic and religion.
Well, it's also meaning when they say a globalization, what they are now moving toward, the new term is this public-private partnership.
Yes.
And when they mean public, they don't necessarily mean a public company. What they mean is government. And private doesn't mean, although it does in the sense of it trickles down if you can survive. But private really means, honestly, these large corporations, because they really don't have any need for these small businesses anymore.
No, and they're in the process of eliminating just about every small business in this country. And remember, this country is the country that is most free, most dissident from what central government wants, totalitarian system. Once they finish this country off, then there are no other countries to hold them back.
We're the last one. In fact, if you look at their system in the World Economic Forum, actually, I would encourage people to go online and look at that because it's in tremendous detail. This isn't something they just thought of overnight. This has been decades upon decades upon decades of building up to this point, and they got sub-organizations upon sub-organizations upon sub-organizations out there. And one of the areas you can look at is this idea of eliminating capitalism. And they'll still call it capitalism, but it's not the capitalism that you and I think of when we think of capitalism. Their idea of capitalism is this understanding of public-private partnership, as opposed to having a free market system of capitalism. But if you look at their little wheel, the three countries they targeted to eliminate capital, because they had to get rid of capitalism in these countries in order for the world to come under this new system. Three countries: Turkey, Brazil, and the United States. They've already done it in Turkey. They've already done it in Brazil, and they're in the process of doing it here in the United States. And I mean, it's been there. They've told everybody what they're doing, and you can go online right now. This is not something we're making up. I think it's World Economic Forum or Council.org or something like that. I mean, you can Google it. Yeah, it's the forum, WEF. And they have a very detailed that goes in. You can go line by line. Literally, there's like 300 different areas they target. And economic, obviously, is a large area, and that's why we're concentrating on that now. But this whole idea of, that they're trying to transform this economic system. I do have a question that I wanted to bring up here because you talked about it. There's a lot of money our stock market is based off of these 401ks and these institution monies, through, like the 401ks through, is it Edward Jones and, whatever, our normal 401k. I've always thought, in Greece, when Greece went through their, reset that they had to do, their economy crashed and the IMF came in, and part of the IMF stipulation was they literally went and confiscated these 401ks. And I think they did it. Did they do it in Brazil? I can remember. I mean, there was Can't remember if they did it in Brazil or not, but they've done this numerous times over, in different countries. And the IMF has used that as one of their, ways to claw back some money. Did you ever see that happening here in the United States?
Yes, we could very easily see that. We don't have any control over that. I see before that happens that these large financial institutions will more and more use the monies that are generated. They take the money, put it in capital into the various businesses. To control those businesses, they do not concern themselves about short-term profit. And short-term can be 10 years. It doesn't have to be 6 months, or you and I auditing thinks about a year. That's how we think of a short-term. But it could be several years. But the problem you have is that the shareholders and the people that have invested into these companies, because that's what you do when you allow somebody to take your 401k or your annuity and they're investing it in various places, which are these large financial institutions that then take and go into the stock market and buy the shares of stock of various companies. Like we talked about a few minutes ago, the one that has $7.5 trillion, they got a lot of money to go into a lot of businesses. Then the shareholders are the ones that hold shares in the particular company. The people that you talk about with 401ks and the annuities, that money is given to the financial institutions to buy shares in these various companies. Now, the catch is that under the Great Reset, which, as we said, is just rebanded one world system, is that you have no control once you turn that over. And so that financial institution, in conjunction with the government, are putting in social and economic decisions that meet their agenda, not yours. And their agenda, they've been very clear about their agenda, is that individualism goes away. Collectivism is what it's all about. And the ultimate goal of collectivism is totalitarianism. And under one system, which is one world. So we're back to the one world system: government, economic, religion. So, in answer to your question, it depends on how much they want to change the system that we're currently under, i.e., the dollar and the petrodollar. If they want to reset everything, including that, and put up a brand new one, you could go from $500,000 that you've got invested in annuities to zero in a blink of the eye.
Or something less than that.
Or something less than that. Yeah, even less than that. You might owe them. In 1948, Germany, the German citizens woke up and they were taken off the system they had, and they were instilled with the mark. And the mark held from that point on until they changed it to the Eurodollar. So,
well, and they had to do that because they learned their lesson from the Weimar Republic.
Well, they from World War II, Marshall Plan, I mean, they were devastated. I mean, Germany was flat out destroyed. The people had nothing. They couldn't buy food. There was no
because
food
the high ups and the Nazis ended up taking it all.
Yeah.
Skipping town.
So,
a lot of them ended up over here.
Yeah.
But that's another podcast.
That's another one. We'll go down that road in another episode.
Yeah.
But the question then is how safe under our current system or under a new reset system are the 401ks, the annuities, the Social Security payment, um, under Medicare. I mean, we can begin to go off, but under the economic system, the question is we don't know, but it's not in our control, and it really doesn't look too good.
Well, I mean, and in order to get some idea of what's coming, we can look into our past. I mean, you mentioned about the mark in 1948, but later on, it was this whole euro system where all of Europe, because honestly speaking, that was kind of an early model of what they want to incorporate across the world, which is a region or a regional type government system. And right now they have three systems set up. They got like a North American system, they got a European system, and they got an Asian system. And then under that, they have subsystems. So Africa would come under a sub, Middle East would come under a sub, and South America and Central America would come under a sub. So they kind of have already done pre-runs for this. And I think you were, over in Europe when they first started this whole euro dollar, because honestly, what it was is all the European countries just all of a sudden the next day. Now, of course, they warned them and they gave them, advance notice, but literally their currency was reset in one day.
Yeah. In fact, I was there the first day that the euro dollar went into effect. We happened to be on a 6-week tour of Europe in Germany at the time. We have friends over there. And the machines to buy your tickets, because transportation is by train a lot.
Right.
I wish we had it here in the United States.
Oh, they're trying. Of course,
We had
unfortunately,
it. They destroyed it. Yeah.
people's hands get, in there, and a project that costs 500 million ends up being 2.5 billion, and it never gets done.
Yeah. But they didn't even have the machines turned over to pay things in the euro dollar, so that they had to go through all that process to change it over. And again, it was a forerunner, as you said, because it used to be when I first was in Germany that you had to go through security checkpoints on the individual countries, and that's kind of gone away.
Yeah, you can move freely in Europe right now.
Yeah, but
you don't need,
when I first
every
was
single
over there,
checkpoint to check your passport. You can just move through.
I say I was there when you did do that, because I lived in Germany in the early 70s.
Papers, please.
Yeah. But that again was a consolidation of a region, bringing together under one system. And what we're seeing now under this great reset is that the last country that's left, the United States, the one that is so against this because their individualism. This is why we've seen such a outbreak of not standing for Pledge of Allegiance, not recognizing the flag, not being an American, because they've been taught in the schools that Americans are terrible. We're global. This has been coming for a long time.
Yeah, they've been preparing us and preparing generations.
Exactly.
Well, and back to what you said before, the U.S. being the last one to fall. I mean, what do we have over the last few years? China now has taken back Taiwan and Hong Kong, the bastions of capitalism. And now they're going to come under the communist, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. And, now that's going to move into this whole Asian union that they want to create, which would incorporate probably India as well over there. But I mean, this has been planned. I mean, the whole point of what we're talking about here, this isn't something that they just thought of overnight and they're just willy nilly throwing this out. This
Yeah.
has been planned in detail and just slowly, moving us forward and forward and forward. So we don't necessarily notice it until now, where we're like, hey, wait. Because again, now they can get away with it because there's really nothing we can do to, you know,
Yeah.
what can we do? I mean, our federal bureaucracy system is now fully entrenched. What
Yes.
can a citizenry do? Not
Not much
much.
anymore.
I mean, we've tried. What are you going to do? Vote out a person? Oh, big whip. What does that do?
Yeah. And you can't even vote them out.
Yeah.
Because
Get mad at a governor? What's that going to do?
Yeah.
They'll just send the police after you, or the sheriff, or just shut you in the house, or send a COVID police, or whatever you want to do. There's nothing you can do at this point.
No. The only thing that can be done is that the Holy Spirit takes over. And at this point in time, this may be the time. We don't know.
We have to live as if we're a stranger in a world,
Yeah.
whether we like it or not, and have to rely on the Holy Spirit.
Exactly.
Now, I want to get in. I mean, I talked about China a little bit here, and it's curious what China is doing. And anybody knows when I say China, it really means the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, because what they did was they created this model where it appears like there are businesses out there, almost like a capitalist system, but it's not really a capitalist system. It's utilizing the market system, but they control a portion of these companies. And I think it's 20 or 25%. But what that 20 or 25% gets them is pretty much total control, because they get to dictate what they want for that, company. And not only is that, implemented in China, for any business that wants to start, they have to have the, Chinese government involved, but it's also any American company or foreign company that comes into China that wants to do business with China, they have to have some kind of Chinese involvement in the company. And they've created this model. And I believe that's a forerunner for what they want to do going forward in this new economic system that they're pushing onto us. You agree with that, or you have a different opinion of that?
No, that's absolutely true. However, the United States is coming at it a little bit different in that the uh, institutional financial institutions are in conjunction with the government so that they're putting the agenda, the same agenda that China has, the governmental control of all of these businesses across the United States. Once they eliminate all the small businesses, they don't have near the problem of control, because this is all about control. And so they're here in the United States, they're doing it through the investment firms to control the businesses, like what we talked about here a few minutes ago, as opposed to the government in China, where they have specific bureaucratic uh, individuals working with the businesses to have their agenda put in. On this side of the here in the United States, the uh, financial institutions that have the control over the individual businesses are putting in what government wants into the businesses, which um, such as diversity, climate change, uh, mandating taking a vaccine. If you're an employee, you can go right down the line because they are stakeholders. And as we were talking earlier, The people with 401ks are not stakeholders. The people that have bought shares individually outside of an annuity, I mean, people just invest. They're not, there's maybe shareholders, but they're not stakeholders. Management of these companies that are controlled by the large investment firms through the capital that they produce are stakeholders. And also the financial institutions that are doing this are stakeholders.
Yeah, the
And
institutional investors.
Exactly. And the government is a stakeholder. Those are your stakeholders that they keep talking about, not you and I. We have no input in this whatsoever.
Other than we give them the money.
Well, you get, yeah, well,
and then they get to do whatever they want with the money.
that's right. That they already
what's that any difference than taxes?
No.
You know, we have no control over what they do with our taxes.
Nope, that's true. And so they're going to get it one way or the other.
Now, what would be the benefit for a corporation? You know, I'm not throwing out a big corporation. I'm not going to put any name out. Anybody can come up with names. But what would be the benefit for a big corporation to, say, have the government as a stakeholder?
Okay, well, let's take for example, you sell food stuff, and you're a big corporation. You sell food stuff. You'll be able to get, if you have cooperate with government, if the, as we explained, the financial institution has put capital in you, and because they put a certain amount of capital, could be 20%, could be 50%, you will listen to them as a management.
Or it could even just be a loan.
Or it could
be there's stipulations on loans. It doesn't necessarily have to be
absolutely
capital. They could loan you, you know, a business $100 million or $500 million, and they have stipulations.
And then you're willing to do that. You will do what they want, and by doing what they want, if you're selling food, then the warehouses, if you don't own the warehouse, you'll be able to get the food from the warehouse, or you'll be able to get it from the trucks that are being delivered, because the trucks will be able to deliver you. You go all the way back to the farms that are co-ops. The co-op will provide for you. But if you don't do that, you don't get your food to sell. You don't get your inventory.
Or you're way down the line.
You're way down the
line. So that
line.
your inventory is, you know, just in time is irrelevant at that point.
Yeah. And so you have to play ball with those that control you, the stakeholders. You have to play ball with them, because if you don't, you're closed. And if they have that control, it's consolidated. And the more consolidated it is, then you can then take the country and be consolidated into a region, and that region can be consolidated into one. And all of a sudden, we have a one world system, or the Great Reset. Same thing.
And they can roll that out over a short amount of time.
Oh, yeah.
Not necessarily overnight, but over a few years or a decade.
Oh, it's as fast as you want. I mean, you can come in and just literally confiscate the money that's in the stock market and take it over completely. Now,
well, we've already shown that they can shut down businesses in a day.
Yeah.
And that's what we had with this COVID. They literally, you're not allowed to operate your business. You literally cannot open your business.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you know, and then of course the government came in and say, hey, we're going to give you a lifeline to these small businesses, you know, through these PPP loans. And you and I have, you know, dealt with that with our companies. And of course, they just threw it out there and oh, this is great, you know. And so all of our, you know, small businesses joined up to it. Well, now, you know, we go to, it was supposed to just be forgivable loans. Well, now all of a sudden, over 6 months, I mean, you know, what loan, you know, would you go in and get a loan that says, "Oh, here, just sign here and don't worry about it. We'll do the loan stipulations later on, and just sign here." And that's really what the PPP loan was: is, hey, just sign here, and then don't worry about it. It'll be forgiven later on. Well, now they're rewriting the law. It's taken 6 months. You got to jump through all these hoops. It may or may not be forgiven. They're slow to forgive it. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And then you add the fraud involved. And really what it was, was a lot of these big businesses. I mean, this was supposed to be for small businesses. And what you had is you literally had public companies getting these small business loans. How does that even make sense? Of course, they can come up with well, it was because they had, we treated each of these, uh, each of these offices as its own separate thing, even though they had, 1,000 offices across the country and they had, 200,000 employees, they're still considered a small business. Well, that doesn't make sense. And then, of course, you had the fraud involved, which that didn't help. You had these, which happens. You had these fraudulent people come in and they're buying $1 million homes and $500,000 Bugattis and such, but the problem is you have these small businesses that are being destroyed. And now they're looking at possibly having to pay back a loan, which was, given to them as, oh, this is forgivable. But now all of a sudden, oh, well, you didn't quite do this stipulation or that stipulation. Why these big businesses just get away with it, or, oh, well, we'll just get some money from our investors and pay off the loan. Not a big deal. And, and that was supposed to be a lifeline to these businesses because, again, this is the first time in our history where the government mandated all businesses to shut down. You couldn't open legally. You could not open. And so that was supposed to be compensation to these small businesses for you complying with the law that says you cannot open. Well, a month turned into 2 months, 2 months turned into 4 months, 4 months turned into 6 months. Now you got all these regulations. Some states you still can't even open up, certain businesses. And now here we are heading into the end of the year. And, they're now starting to mandate these businesses to shut down again, except this time, where's the lifeline? I mean, if a small business survived through the last 6 months, can they survive through the next 6 months with no lifeline? Even though the government has supposedly passed or beginning to pass a, bill that will, supposedly help the small business, but not really, because what's really helping is these defense contractors.
Yeah,
And then
that's
as
what
far
the
as the
money's for.
individual, they're throwing $600 to them and say, oh, well, this is a lifeline. No, it's not. I mean, what's $600 buy? You can't even buy rent with $600. I mean, it's ridiculous. But hey, these defense contractors get a big bailout.
But again, if you look at the agenda, pulling this kind of together here, we are moving toward a one world economic system. We were moving toward that until the current administration put brakes on it. Of course, there was a lot of squealing going on because the brakes were put on.
Yeah, it was just too deep of a system of bureaucracy. I mean, that's what ultimately what we found out.
And we also know that the Federal Reserve System, currently as it stands, is at the pinnacle of the time to collapse. I mean, it's been held on with a shoestring for the last 10, 15 years. And things are in place to reset the economic system in this country. And we know where that's headed. Because when they reset it, they have consolidated into a small enough population of businesses that they can pretty well control. And since they're controlling the government and they're controlling the capital that goes to these businesses, they'll get their way. And so now you're going to have a much better consolidation of the economic system that exists in the United States so that it will be controlled by a small group of companies that are being utilized to put into effect social agenda that will be controlled by government. And in later episodes, we'll step through all of those things. But the economic system is close to a collapse.
Well, it's that way. It's the 100-year
Yeah, it's
walk.
just,
I mean, honestly, most economic systems are lucky if they last 100 years throughout history. And so now we are coming to the end of the cycle. And like you said, honestly, we've been on life support system for the last 20 years, in our economic system because they've been beefing it up to the Federal Reserve through the fiat system and through the just artificial um, way that they value things. And what you now have is you have this. I mean, look at the spending just in the last 20 years. I mean, literally trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. But again, why are they doing that? They're doing that because really there's no reason, because they know they're going to get revalued. So it's just, spend because it'll just get revalued and we'll move on to a new system. But the problem you got is, and this is in line with how economics works, since the American dollar is the, world currency in essence, every time we devalue the world currency, we as Americans are the first tier or the first, one that gets affected by that. And that's through inflation. But the rest of the world who uses the dollar as to, help value their currency, it affects them worse than it affects us. So every time we devalue our money by spending, it exponentially hurts other countries. And what we've done now over the last, year because of COVID is, I mean, we've just been spending. I mean, yeah, we passed a $2.5 trillion thing, a 1 trillion. I mean, it's just like these numbers are just ridiculous. What's that? What that is doing is it is exponentially hurting other countries. And so they're now starting to scream saying, hey, we got to do something different because every time the United States devalues their currency, it affects us over here. So we need to come up with something different. And, what they're talking about is stuff like, instead of just having the dollar as the world currency, having a conglomerate of different currencies, such as the yen and the ruble and the dollar and, the Indian. I mean, there's lots of different ones and it kind of goes into a pot. And so what that does though is as we're moving, and that's probably what we're moving into eventually. And in order to get a better value on that, you got to have something substantial asset. That doesn't help you. And so what has China done? And what has Russia done? They've gone out and bought just pallets of gold, literal gold. What has the United States done? I don't know. I don't even know what our gold reserve is. I mean, we can't even get to, we don't know. We're supposed to be holding other countries' gold reserve. I don't know if we do that or not. But what China and Russia has done is they've gone out and gotten this gold. Well, why? Over the last few decades. Well, it's because they're anticipating this shift into a new currency of a conglomerate type currency where multiple different countries have this, say, regional currencies. And so they want theirs to be valued at the highest level because obviously then they get their assets are worth more than the other assets. What does the United States have? We have debt. We're the biggest debtor nation in the world, and we continue to have debt upon debt. You know, and so what is that going to mean as we go into this new reset? Where do you see the United States in this?
Well, all of past history, central governments do not bring other countries up to your standard. They lower your standard to the other country. And we're seeing evidence of what's coming anyway. For example, you're going to have completely open borders. Now, having open borders will bring in a substantial amount of new people that uh, primarily are unskilled, and they will be relying on the government. We already have evidence of that now, but it will be magnified to a great extent. It will place much greater burden on this country, and you will see a lowering of the standard in this country. And then if you have central government, as we'll begin to talk about, I guess, the next episode, um, when central government has the agendas that do not benefit the middle class because they don't want the middle class. The middle class is too hard to control. The middle class typically are independent thinkers, or at least some of it, and they can't control that. So they've got to have a better way of controlling it. Well, by bringing in a substantial greater increase in population, this country's resources will collapse. And then they'll have to put in it. Well, what do we got back to? An economic system. We'll have to put in governmental programs, which we'll talk about, I guess, the next episode. They will put restrictions on even greater than what we see now. So that's how it's going to affect us.
Well, I was perusing through a bookstore. The few that are left, you probably figure out which one. But I ran past a book that is out right now that says that the United States can go to 1 billion people. That's kind of the premise of their book. And I can't imagine the United States with 1 billion people.
Well, that's
You talk about the resources being stretched on that.
Well, if we had a continuation of the economic system that we've had, where the individual has the right to be able to have their own business or whatever, then yeah, we could handle 1 billion people. I mean, the landmass is certainly capable of it.
Yeah, we definitely have enough land.
Yeah, because that's only 3 times what we have. 1 billion people is 3 times, because we have 350
Yeah, we
million
have vast numbers of acres that are just
there's a lot of space.
untouched.
But the
Of course, the
problem
federal government owns a lot of it.
Yeah. And the problem we have is that the federal government, of those that are going to be in power from January 21st, have no desire whatsoever to have individualism and nationalism as part of their agenda. And so, therefore, the billion people that'd be what, 600 million more coming in here.
Right.
And I mean, they come in here they don't have the health standards, they don't have the work skills, that you can go down the line, that it will tax our resources greatly. And the government will tax us to do that. And therefore, we're back to what we talked about. It will be a lowering of our standard, not an increase. So, again, what is the goal? The goal is to consolidate all of the countries under central control, consolidate the economic system, and we're there. I mean, that's what is here.
Well, that is, on that. It's a good way to wrap up this session that we have here, and we'll continue on with this discussion in the next episode. But then probably, hopefully, although you and I can talk for hours on economic, and maybe we'll do that. I don't know. But we'll eventually get into the next piece of the puzzle, which is this idea of a world government or governance system. And so let's go ahead and wrap up this episode, and we will see you on the next episode.
This is my story. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long.